everyone, it's Becky here and welcome back to my channel and welcome back to a new video. I am a little bit hyper about today's video because it's a topic I'm very excited about and it's something I would very much love to have a discussion with you about on the topic of rereading books. And I would very much love this to be a conversation or discussion. I didn't necessarily want it to do a tag video, but I would love for you, if you have a YouTube channel and you're interested in this topic and you feel like this, please feel free to make some sort of like response video on your own and discuss this further. And if you do not have a channel or if you just really don't feel like it, please leave a comment down below and I would love for you to answer a couple of my questions, which I will ask you in a minute. But yeah, I just thought it could be a nice time of us chatting about this topic, rereading books, because it's something I have been thinking about a lot lately. And I just thought I would just ask you, my lovely fellow booktubers and avid readers, and that's something we can discuss together. So the questions I would love to ask you are: do you reread books? If yes, why? If no, why? And what is the book you have reread the most times? You can share how many times and why. So please let me know either in the comments or in your own video. And the reason why I started to think of this topic actually is because I'm currently rereading Dracula. I'm almost done at this point. And I recalled to one moment a couple of years ago, and I believe I actually mentioned this in one of my videos before, that I am one of those people who actually never reread books. And as a reason I said a very simple thing. I said that there are so many books in this world and on my TBR which I would rather read as a new books than coming back to the books which I already read and I know how they end. Well, but this is my thought process I had. And now as I was rereading the Dracula, I realized, okay, hold the phone. You said this once before, however, since then you read so many books many times, you reread books, and you're still planning on rereading books. So that just kind of made me thinking about why people say that they don't reread books and why they don't. There is nothing wrong about it if you don't reread them. I used to be like that. But then if you do reread books, why is that? And I came up with a couple of not necessarily reasons, but what I think are the reasons coming from my own experiences why people reread books. And the first one is that we just genuinely love the book we are reading and we are very much enjoying it, and we love either the characters or the story, or there is just something about that story we just enjoy and we want to come back to it as a comfort read. And sometimes there might be some sort of let's say event which is tied up, or a memory or history to that book, and that for me, for example, is a case of the Three Musketeers, because if you have been here at least a little while on this channel, you know that Three Musketeers is one of my all-time favorite books by Alexandre Dumas, and I read this book many times. And the reason why I started with this book in the first place is that my dad gave it to me because these books belonged to him. I actually can show you, I have it here. So this is the book by my dad, from my dad, and I also have the second part, which is Three Musketeers After 20 Years, and it's very old and I very much love it. I believe it's from 70s. And first of all, when my dad gave this to me, he was talking about this book and he was very passionate because how much he enjoyed the story. And since then, when I read it, we spoke about it together and it was a lovely memory for me. And we also watched a couple of movie adaptations together. So I have this special relationship with this book because it also reminds me of my dad. And I absolutely love the story, so I just love to read it again because of the story of the book itself, and also because of the story it has with my life specifically. And then, which also leads me to the second point, is that sometimes we reread books, especially in our booktube world, because of certain booktube events. So, for example, it's so funny, sorry, but every time I want to say, for example, I want to say zum Beispiel because my brain is just so overpowered with learning German right now. I couldn't tell you anything else in German, but zum Beispiel is just coming there. So if I pause for a second, I'm so sorry, but it's just my brain fighting different languages right now. So yes, for example, Three Musketeers. I have also this copy, which I purchased for the purposes of a read-along, which I was organizing, I believe it was 2 years ago in March, or 3 already. And I did this. Oh, hello, can we focus? Thank you. And I read this. Okay, why is my card blinking? Anyway, I purchased this book for the purposes of read along, which I was organizing a couple years ago on BookTube, and with a couple of lovely booktubers and also subscribers and fellow bookworms, we got together over the Voxer and we were reading chapter by chapter and we were discussing the book as we were reading it, and it was one of the best things in my life. And that was the third time I reread this book, and actually this whole event, BookTube event, brought me to it. And then comes with it, for example, Jane Austen July, because there are certain events such as Victober or Nonfiction November or Jane Austen July, which are certain events throughout the year where we in BookTube love to read certain types of books. So every time in July I pick at least one of her books and I read it again. Most of the time it's Pride and Prejudice, of course. But if not necessarily this one, I at least reread couple chapters which were my favorites, or at least little bits and pieces from the book. And there's also another way how we come across to reread books, because of the BookTube events. Sometimes we reread books because of the certain information. For example, when it comes to non-fiction books, I love to annotate my books, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, and write certain notes and little sticky notes, in having sticky notes in my books. And sometimes when I speak about certain topic, or when I want to read about certain topic and I remember that I read this before in some book, I want to come back to that book. Or now, for example, Sir David Attenborough recently released the book about oceans, and I read The Life on Our Planet a couple years back, and I very much loved that book, although it terrified me to death, but I very much loved it. And now when I want to read the books about the ocean, I also want to reread the previous book, which I highly encourage you to do it as well, because it's always good to remind ourselves that we need to take a better care of our planet. So please reread that, or read it for the first time if you haven't yet. So that's, for example, with non-fiction books, but it can also apply for the fiction books, because another reason is that I really do believe that certain books is better to read at certain age or at certain life experiences. Because, for example, I remember in the primary school when our teachers would give us to read, for example, Hemingway or Remarque or Salinger, and those are the books when you read in a primary school or high school when you are about 13-14 years old. And yes, you do understand those words and what the book is saying, and you might have, for example, favorite character in those books, but still the whole context of the book, it feels different when reading about the war or loneliness or alcoholism and these sort of things when you are older, after you have certain experiences. And then, for example, Shakespeare as well, that's the experience I have with Shakespeare sonnets. I remember trying to read Shakespeare when I was, again, in the primary school. First of all, I had to read it in translated language, so I had to read it from English to Slovak, because obviously I could not really speak English fluently in primary school, so I would be reading it in Slovak. But first of all, it would be translated in Slovak, however, with also the very Shakespearean language, and I just didn't even know the certain words. Although they were written in Slovak, I just didn't really know them because I was too young to actually get that vocabulary from somewhere. And also then the meaning of those words. And now, when I was in Milan, actually last year, I got this book, which is Shakespeare Sonnets, and it's written both in Italian and in English. And I saw this in the shop, and this is actually what popped into my mind regarding rereadings, because I realized, okay, now I can read this book, I can read it in English, in original language, because I am fluent now enough, and I also know a lot of words which I haven't known before. But also reading about love when you are 10 or when you are 15 and when you are 28, it feels different, and I know it will feel different when I read this 20 years later or 50 years later. It will always feel different. So there are different reasons why to reread books, and one of them as well can be, and that's my case, for example, with The Gentleman in Moscow. I just believe that some books are mostly enjoyed even more when we reread them, because when I was reading Gentleman in Moscow, it was the first time I was reading a book by Amor Towles, and I was realizing as I was reading it how much I enjoyed. However, there was during the time when I was going through certain things and moving, and my mind was just distracted and I couldn't really focus properly. And I remember thinking, I will definitely reread this because I think I will enjoy it more for the second time. And I really do believe that's the case. But also, this summer I read another book by his, The Table for Two, and I remembered it so much that again it made me think of the previous book, The Gentleman in Moscow, and it really encouraged me, and I really wanted to read it as well. So that's something I would like to read it quite soon, because sometimes when we like some author, it just encourages us to either reread some of his older books which we read before and just explore his writing more deeply. And so to say that sometimes when rereading some book, certain things can really apply better for our life later on, and we always can notice something else in the book which we haven't seen before, which is also when you rewatch a movie or something. But when rereading, when giving it a second thought and the proper deeper dive, it can reveal to you more things than when you read it for the first time, which is also funny because this reminds me that how I was always saying I just don't reread books, and then I do read Bible every day, and it's like reading certain passages over and over again throughout the years, and every time it's just say something different to me, and yet it never clicked to me that okay, but that's the kind of the same thing when rereading the books. Well, not the same, because Bible is not the same, but you know what I mean. So whenever you reread the books, it just tells you something different according to situation you are in. And then sometimes it happens that we have completely random reason why we decide to pick up a book and reread it. And little story time, if you have time and if you're interested, but it's kind of funny. So if you've been here for a while, you know that alongside Three Musketeers, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier is one of my favorites as well, and I also have the whole video about Daphne du Maurier's books, not all of them but quite a lot of them, so you can check that out as well. But I read Rebecca for the first time when I was, I think, 11 or 12, because my granny gave me her copy of the book, which is also from, I believe, 60s or 70s, and I absolutely loved it. And that was the first time I read it in Slovak. And then I read it actually one more time later in English, but when I met my boyfriend for the first time and we started for the first time in those first few weeks and months, he's also an avid reader, but he mostly loved to read non-fiction. And when we were talking about books in those early stages, I said that Rebecca is one of my favorites, and he was like, you know what, I'm gonna get the copy and I'm gonna read it. Disclaimer, by this time he had not finished the book, but I'm sure he will. And he got this book, and that's how we got to second copy in English actually, because now we live together. And now the point, when we moved in together, we are now living in the apartment which firstly belonged to his grandmother. And now we live in this apartment, and when we were going through certain things and sorting her things, some of them which were still left here, and we got to the books. So I was browsing the bookshelves, because of course, and there were mostly non-fiction books, because I think that's where my boyfriend gets his love for non-fiction, because Granny was the same. She had a lot of dictionaries and non-fiction books, and they were all in German, of course, so I could not really understand all of them, but I could clearly see that most of it is non-fiction. But you see what's coming now? There was one fiction book, and that was Rebecca. There was old copy of Rebecca, and when we saw it, we just looked at it and we were like, okay, I think we got a little blessing to live here because the book is here, and that was literally almost 1 out of 2 or 3 fiction books we found here, which is quite interesting. So now we have actually 3 copies of Rebecca in Slovak, English and German, so yeah. That was funny. But, well, so to say that when we discovered this, I suddenly got into the mood to reread the book, so that's when I picked it up and just reread it. Okay, my friends, so I think I got to say everything I wanted to say at this point on my side, and now I would love for you to let me know in the comments or in your own video or on Instagram some answers to these questions, please. Do you reread books? If yes, why? Which book have you reread the most times and why? How many times? If you do not reread books, why is that? And just have a little discussion with me, because I'm very much interested about this. And I will see you with another video very soon, and until then, take care. Bye bye!